Welcome to What Do You Want to Do, the show that will hopefully help you figure out what you want to do in life or reconnect you to what you love doing. Each show has a guest who is doing what they want to do, whether it's in their career or in addition to their regular job. Most importantly, we want to help you realize that no matter your age, you too can do what you want to do if you have the will to do it. Now here's your host, Leonard Kaplan.
And here we are again with another edition of What Do You Want to Do? And today's guest is very unique, and I've known her for some time, although we haven't seen each other since 1994. And she's part of that mythical group that I always mention and refer to as the Cable Club. And
Yay, Cable Club.
yes, and so many talented people came out of that group, and this person is no exception, Sarah Guerin. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Len. It feels like yesterday, doesn't it?
It does, now that we're face to face here, so to speak. Now, Sarah is on here because I think you have the most, is the word esoteric career that I can think of that we've had on here. We've had a luthier on here. We've had an animator. We've had a couple of stand-up comedians. We've had musicians. We've had a whole bunch of other people, but we've never had a bootmaker on the show. Sarah is a bootmaker in the tradition of old-time boot and shoe makers, correct?
Yes, I am. It's probably the luthier is the closest discipline I come to of your guests because it's a traditional art. So I'm a handmade Western cowboy bootmaker.
Amazing.
It's a long-standing tradition. Yeah.
You are in your shop, correct, right now?
Yeah. Yes, I am. I work out of a replica 10-footer shoe shop, which were the traditional handmade shoe vernacular buildings that shoes were made in Massachusetts in the 1800s.
Wow.
So I am a bootmaker, but my practice actually has a couple different components, and one of them is researching shoemaker. I started as an architect, so I researched the spaces where footwear has been made over time and how the architecture can support the craft or hinder the that knowledge or the transfer of knowledge. So
you started off in the Cable Club. You were an artist. One time, I'll never forget it. I still have it someplace. You gave me a drawing of an eagle, and you just said, I'm going to throw this away. You can have it. And I looked at that eagle, and it was the most realistic. I could feel the feathers practically, and I couldn't believe you were throwing it away. So you are a very talented artist, and you decided to make your art as a bootmaker. How did this come about?
It came, when I look back on it, it seems pretty linear, although as I was in each phase, it wasn't so obvious. But I went to art school. I majored in architecture, so it seemed to be a more a discipline that was easier to make a living in. And I really loved the education. But before I was even done with the program, I knew I didn't want to be an architect because the scale was too big for me. So I did work for an architect for a while, and I did construction, but I really was just very hands-on, and the scale was too big. So I had a series of different jobs. I worked in a theater. I did costume work, set design, stage managing. I did, what else? The first official job I had getting out of college was in a trade show booth design build place, which was really creative, fun work. And I learned a lot at each of these places. I learned a lot of like techniques and skills and really enjoyed myself until I got to the point where I didn't want to do it anymore for one reason or another. And like the trade show booth place, it was like I didn't want to be making work that supported this corporate industry in some way. Like it just wasn't fulfilling. And the theater stuff was great, but it wasn't my vision and it wasn't my forte. And all along the way, I always kind of made shoes, but I didn't know that shoemaking was a job that one could do or how you even went about doing it. I just did it in like bits and pieces on my own until I found out about this shoemaking school in England that taught traditional handmade shoemaking. And this was after I lived in France for a few years working in a model building shop where I learned incredibly awesome control and technique and work habits that I don't think I would have learned in an American shop just because the culture is so different. but it also, we were making plastic models of malls and architecture and trains and things, and not something that I felt the end product was this valuable gift to the world. And I have lofty ideals of things having more meaning than that for me. So I ended up going to this traditional shoemaking school and naively thinking, when I graduate, I'm going to be a shoemaker and I'll be able to do exactly what I wanted to do, marrying all these different aspects of what I learned already. And then at the end of it, it was really also a place people went to learn how to be shoe designers, like to get a job at, for fashion designers or become one themselves, and a stepping stone to that. So if somebody wanted to pursue the path that I was interested in, which was rarer and becomes rarer and rarer, you really need to apprentice with somebody who does it already, because you can learn the concepts of pattern making and how shoe construction works, but it's such a complex and labor intensive craft that you really need that kind of hands-on practice time in order to do it well. So I had children at the time. I had to come back home to Massachusetts, and they have their life, and I stayed home with my kids. So I was kind of trying to fit in my passions here and there without interrupting their lives. And the only shoemaker, Massachusetts was once, like, for a little history, Massachusetts was once the shoemaking capital of the world, and it was everywhere and ubiquitous, and people knew how to make shoes, and it has all disappeared. And the only person I could find coming back here was a cowboy bootmaker in Central Mass who was from Colorado, and Colorado and Texas kind of have the strongest bootmaking traditions in the United States. And he had moved to Massachusetts because his wife was from here and her parents were infirm. So it was just my luck that he came here and brought his knowledge here. And in a sense, I think he was bringing knowledge back to where it had used to be. And I apprenticed with him for 3 years and learned that particular craft of American cowboy bootmaking, thinking I would just add that to the things I knew and go back to shoemaking and bootmaking are different enough that they're their own disciplines. But I fell in love with the pull-on Western bootmaking. I mean, it really was kind of a perfect manifestation of all the things that I value. So I have stuck with it, and I started my own business, and I make cowboy boots for people, for clients. They hire me to make them, but then I also make works of art using the technical skills of bootmaking, which have taken a long time to hone and do well. And then I show those, they're sculptures, and I show those in shows, and
That's
live
amazing.
off of kind of art grants based on that type of work.
That's an amazing trajectory that you have in your career. Now, if it wasn't for that master bootmaker, you might be pursuing just shoes or maybe a different style of boot. Maybe you might went back to England and learned the English bootmaking.
It's true. English bootmaking still has a pretty vibrant hold. Like they haven't started to kind of disappear or suffer as much in riding boots, like that traditional black riding boot for horseback riding. And the cowboy boot style is related to it. It's a cousin, sort of, but it's very unique to North America, and not the United States, because Mexico has a really strong bootmaking tradition too. But I knew nothing about it, and it's funny because a lot of the people in bootmaking world and culture have that strong sense of history because they grew up with it somehow, and we didn't here in Greater Boston.
Right. Now,
so it was something new to me.
If you were out in Arizona or Wyoming, do you think your business would be more booming? Not that it isn't now. I don't know.
I don't know. It would definitely be different. And I feel a little isolated from the bootmaking community in some ways, but in other ways, just because of Instagram and Facebook forums and footwear making symposiums and get-togethers, I'm not. I am connected to that world. And the man who trained me said he thought his business would go under when he moved to Massachusetts because there isn't a boot culture the way there was in Colorado. And instead it did much better because there was just more money here. And that's one of the conditions of this craft, is that it costs a lot of money to buy these boots. So the people that are supporting you and your patrons and who are a part of that, the whole big picture of supporting a craft, but also getting these bespoke boots made to their feet, have to have a lot of money. So I don't know what it would be like in another place. I really can't speculate,
Who
but
are,
I do well here.
right. Who are your customers mostly? Are they equestrians or just people with a very high fashion sense?
They are to a T entrepreneurs, people who are, it's funny, like looking back on at the people who've hired me to make boots. They're people that had enough income to treat themselves and support my craft and get this thing that meant a lot to them, but they weren't necessarily at a level of wealth that it didn't mean anything, that they spending that much money on a pair of boots. And all of them have been business owners and entrepreneurs. And I think that there's just something about that. It's more nuanced than just buying a really expensive pair of boots. There's an experience and a process, and they are made specifically for you. And the decorative designs are made specifically for you. And there's some kind of shared value between what I do and this type of person that it has turned out that that's who hires me over and over again, that type of personality or character.
Now, I'm always, this probably about me, I'm always interested in the history of anything. What I noticed in the 60s, the Beatles had boots and like they weren't really high boots, but they called them Beatle boots. And I still wear them to this day. And correct me if I'm wrong, but in the old days, boots were made to protect somebody's pants, right? They were high, so you tuck your pants in. And today it seems to be the opposite. People want to show off their boots, so they I don't know, they don't tuck their pants in, and I don't know. I don't get it.
I think it's a personal choice, like an aesthetic choice. I know some people in the world of cowboy boots it's called shotgunning if you tuck your pants into the boots. So some people like to show it off and shotgun their boots, but a lot of people like this really, personal, meaningful design on their boots that means something to them, and they sort of keep it for them. So they have their pants over it, and it's like they're keeping this secret. And sometimes the vamp or the part of your foot that shows is very plain, but then if you lifted up the pant leg, you would see this really elaborate design. And there seems to be more of that, like that it's this very personal, private thing. But then if they decide to show it to somebody deliberately, they will. And I find more of that than shotgunning. Although I have someone who has bought 3 pair of boots for me that have very elaborate designs and shotguns them all the time. So they're always being shown off.
But
Beatle boots there's like 2 kinds really, like the zip up short ankle boot, and then the Chelsea boot where it has elastic on either side. Which kind do you have?
The zip up kind. Yeah. The kind the Beatles had, of course.
Well, they had Chelsea boots too. John had Chelsea boots with the elastics.
What about boondockers? Are those considered boots?
I guess. I don't know. I don't know what you mean by boondocker.
Maybe they don't call. I'm dating myself again. Maybe they don't call them that anymore. The kind that they're brown and they have these really long laces and they take a year to lace up, and you wear them out in the snow.
Oh, I mean, boots are boots.
Yeah.
So I guess.
I didn't try to stump you there. It's just
there's a lace-up cowboy boot called a packer but it still looks like this marriage between a derby style shoe, which is lace up, but then laces all the way up the leg with the speed hooks or something.
When people buy a particular kind of boot, are they, I don't want to say obligated, but do they traditionally wear other things on their body to complement them?
I don't know. I again, that must be a personal thing. I don't make accessories or anything, so it's not something that would come from me. I do know, like, one client tries to match her coat to different boots and a bag, that kind of thing. But that's her realm.
What do you do when? And I saw a Facebook post of yours. You made a pair of boots for a mutual friend of ours, Jeremy Goodwin.
Yeah,
I saw that.
The sumptuary boots, I called them.
Sumptuary. Okay, what do you mean by that?
So the Puritans passed a law in the 1700s called the sumptuary law that made anything decorative illegal without paying a fine.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Like you couldn't wear lace, and if you wore, they called them great boots or high boots. So if they came up high on your leg, they were considered vain and they were illegal. although classically, like every other law enacted over time, it didn't apply to the really wealthy members of our society. But so I made these boots for Jeremy very deliberately, with history of Puritans and Puritan art, and the fronts are very plain. And he was leaving Massachusetts for St. Louis. So the backs of panels of the boots are based on Puritan gravestone art. And they say departed Massachusetts, 2018, I think it was, and then age 41, and then have the little winged heads, the cherub heads that were on the gravestone art, so that they were plain in the front, but good with the Puritans, but then, you know, very elaborate in the back, and hoping that he would come back someday because we love Jeremy.
That's that's pretty interesting. What's the most unusual request that you've had for a custom-made cowboy boot?
I had a stove refurbisher. He does antique stoves, and he's kind of the best of the best. Wanted I could show it to you.
Oh, look at that.
So I made well, this is the Fire Fiend, the face of designed in the 1890s or 1880s. And I did a leather tile version of it. And then, you know, modeled the style of the boot, which is like this tall, thin style with these horizontal bands, after a parlor stove, like an 1880s parlor stove. So to me, just let me flip back.
That face is very spooky to me.
Well, he's a fiend. He's a fire fiend.
I would write a story around that, like a curse or something, you know?
It was a good story. We tracked down the artist. He was a ceramic artist from England named Arthur Osborne, and he worked for J&J Low Tile Company in Chelsea, doing all the decorative, relief work of plants and flowers and things that were really popular at the time. And it did lots of tiles that if you see like a mansion in any of the historic New England houses, the tiles around the fireplaces are usually his artwork. And yeah, he did this face. And so the stove refurbisher wanted those on his boots. And that was probably the most unusual request. And at the beginning, difficult, because I wasn't sure how to do it. You know, I was thinking, the hair will be perfect with stitching because cowboy boots have a lot of stitch work. And then when I did that, it looked horrible. It looked like a toddler had done it. I can't give this to him. And then, just started thinking, going back into art mode, like art school mode, like, okay, how did he figure it out? How did he do it? So I ended up doing this like 2,000-year-old plus technique that the Romans used to put leather on their shields to harden it, where you put leather in boiling water and then it becomes malleable, but when it dries, it's like rock hard. So I made first I made the face out of wax, and then I made these little molds of it, and where I could put boiling circles of leather in it and then press it in, and I put it in a vise and leave it a few days and, manipulate it with carving tools and stuff after. And so it was exciting because I was doing something new, and I've used that technique a few times since then on different decorative parts of boots.
So you work in a very expensive field, because you have to pay for all that leather that you use in your boots. And what are some of the other materials and tools that you can tell us about?
So yeah, the boots are almost fully made out of leather. I use some metal in the arch support and some wood in the like their little wooden nails in that making the heels, but the rest is all leather. And I use the highest quality leather that I can get, because if you're going to have boots made to your feet, they really should, that will last generations. They should be made out of the best materials. And it's something that distinguishes handmade boots as well from custom or semi-custom or factory boots. And I can trace the leather is high quality, but you can also trace like the tanneries, how they do. Most of them are family owned small tanneries, and they have responsible and sustainable practices that you can trace and find the provenance of, rather than buying, random leathers that you don't know how it was tanned, what happened to the chemicals afterwards, that type of thing. But I use all hand tools that were the same type of tools used in the 1800s in these shoe shops, because traditional shoemaking has not changed over time. If you make shoes or boots by hand, you're using the same tools that people have used for a long, long time. So I can show you I'll flip again.
That's
try
what
not to shake too much.
you're fine. It's handheld camera. Look at that.
So I call this my cockpit because there's a few different processes. I mean, there are 30 plus processes to making boots, but there's like a 4 subcategories, kind of big ones. And this is the messy one. So this is my messy area where I work on the insoles of shoes and boots. Like this is the whole fast that you sew the boots to. These are irons and different types of knives. This is a Rand knife that you cut the edge of the heel with. These are irons. You heat these up and you smooth the edges of the soles with them. There's different kind of decorative wheels that you can make
Looks like
patterns
a pizza
on. Yeah. So all these old, many of these tools, I mean, they look old because they are old. I'll get them from France or from, bootmakers who retire. And then I have, I have all kinds of fun hand tools, like for pulling out nails. These are the type of nails, and they're still made in Massachusetts because we had such a rich history of the shoe industry here. There's still a couple little businesses that have lasted because their products are still needed. So this company in Whitman still makes these special hand tacks that are made for boot making. And there's this welt is still made in Brockton, which was the boot capital once. And that's another piece of shoes. And so this is kind of my messy station. This is what the basic tool that every shoe or bootmaker needs. It's called the lasting pincer. And it's like a plier that you pull the leather taut with and then hammer at the same time with these little hammer bits. And I have different shaped ones for different parts of the process. This one's really narrow. This one is specific to cowboy boot making because you need the leverage to pull across this shank area. So the tool itself reflects the process, which I think is pretty cool. And my different hammers, there's different types of hammers for different, this is a classic kind of shoe boot making all around hammer, but then I have specialized hammers. This is my favorite tool, and I found it at Brimfield. If anybody from Massachusetts knows the old fair or sale, and it's got, because the shape of the heads, this round flat edge is specifically for hammering in this area of the foot because it's so curved, it's such a tight curve. And then this top is perfectly flat, if you can see, which is what you need for hammering this part of the sole where it needs to be flat and you don't want little dent marks from the typically circular rounded head of a hammer. And I love just how specialized this is, and it just, ups the quality of the work I do when I use it. So this is one of my demo pieces. So I also do demos on shoe and boot making, just so people can learn a little bit more about how these things are done. But this is my demo piece for sewing soles. But you can see on the sole here how very tightly curved it is in that shank area.
Right.
So that when you use that hammer with the curve, it's kind of perfect for that area. And then you get this really beautiful tight join when you're joining the leathers together, and you don't get marks, and kind of the quality of the finishing at the end of boot making is a really important aspect of boot making. So this was my practice boot for Jeremy's, where I was practicing those techniques of doing letters that look like they were chiseled out of a gravestone. And there was the head, the cherub, which is also that same technique that I used on the fire fiend head. I use that for the cherub heads as well. So then I have this workstation, my work table here, where I do a lot of my pattern making. You can see right now I'm working off of setting up the last, which are the wooden forms that boots and shoes are made of, or sometimes plastic. These ones are plastic. But you take all these different measurements and prints and things of somebody's foot in order to make the last accurately reflect their foot so that it fits well. And so that's my work this week. And I've got this is my measuring station. If you were to come and order boots from me, I would measure your feet and we would sit and talk and all that. And these are some of the boots I've made. This one the design was based on a mandrake plant that I would walk by all the time on the Battle Trail at the Man National Park. And these are the first boots I ever made on my own. And this was a design based on shadows of wisteria plants on my front window. And then the Boston Public Library has all these cool old books from France that have the monogramming that you do, like women used to do on sheets and pillowcases. And there's this long tradition in Western boots of putting your initials on a boot. So I tried to like marry those two traditions of doing a little bit of hand embroidery with the inlay. So just to make, mine a little different than your average other bootmaker, not average, but other bootmakers. This one was kind of fun because I did right at the beginning of the pandemic, and the woman wanted thistle flowers. So I spent the time doing this boot just for practice for myself, but also to like have a piece around that I could use to talk about. Because when I make boots for people and they take them and leave, then I never have boots around to show people, which is kind of a bummer. But I did this, and I was so happy I did it because she looked at it and she said, it's cute and it's young and it's vibrant and that's great, but I don't want that. I want tall and thin and elegant and the flowers to look more real. So I ended up I don't have the boots anymore, but I ended up changing the design to be more similar to what she was looking for. And then she was really happy with them. And I was happy too that I was able to make that design closer to what she wanted. And then this was this fun, these are size 22 boots.
Wow.
And this was an artist grant that I got where they paired you with another artist and you two had to make a work of art together. And I was paired with this muralist, like a graffiti artist and muralist, he and I came up with this design based on America. So one boot had the Statue of Liberty, the other boot, which he has, had an American flag on the back. And, we were kind of working separately, but passing the pieces off back and forth. And then this was like one of his spray paint caps. And this was just a really great, fun project during the pandemic. And, we got paid. So these are some of,
amazing.
This is my design station here. And it's my old drafting table from architecture school. And here's Jeremy's boots. Picture of them.
Nice.
But these are some of my design drawings. This is a pair I'm working on right now. And this was kind of like a little mock-up I did of tiger lily flowers that will go on the boots, and some other boot pattern pieces. This is what some of the pieces look like before you sew them all together and turn them into boots. And then I've got my sewing machines. It's a little bit messy over here, but I use two types of sewing machines. This old-fashioned Singer 3115, which is kind of a classic bootmaker's tool, and it's a nice flatbed. And then I also have this post machine, which is more shoemaking than bootmaking, but I love this machine so much that I use it more often than I should. But I built this little platform to make it a flatbed in case I needed a flatbed. But the cool part of a post machine is that it's got this tall post. So you're really able to put like a shoe around it or a tight corner and sew in ways that most sewing machines don't allow you to do. And this is an old industrial sewing machine from Germany that I just took a liking to. And this one's my favorite. We're partners in bootmaking.
What kind of stores would sell all these tools? Where do you go?
So typically they don't. So that's its own adventure. And another way that it's pretty difficult to get into this craft is it takes a long time to slowly find these things, whether it's there's a few tools that cobblers use that we both use, because cobblers and shoemakers or bootmakers are different crafts. But, every once in a while, if a cobbler retires, there's some things you can get that'll help beef up your collection of tools. But it took a while to find these things here or there. And then I kind of have a list, like there was a hierarchy of you have to have this, this, and this in order to start. And then you slowly add the other pieces, and your practice just gets better and better as your skills and your tools together.